Hi class, it's Thursday, April 16th, 2020. So today in math, we're going to be learning about a shape called a kite. This will be our last shape. So hopefully our slideshows will get a little bit quicker. You'll have a question to answer about that on your Google quiz. Remember, your Google quizzes are always underneath your morning message on Google Classroom. In reading, you're going to be reading that article on bats, and you'll have a question about that on your Google quiz. In writing, you're going to be finishing your essay called Celebrity Dinner Party. This is due tomorrow, so if you finished your ending, today would be a great day to look at doing some editing before you type it in to Google Docs. If you have not finished writing a rough draft, you're going to probably be on paper and pencil today. In science, we're going to be talking about animal adaptations. We're going to be watching a video about this on Generation Genius. I'll have a link in the attachments underneath the morning message in Google Classroom. And for prep, don't forget that the prep teachers have come up with a Google Classroom for prep. It is optional, but if you're interested in it, please go there. Today and tomorrow will be the last days that I will include that link in the attachments. Upcoming assignments. So that celebrity dinner party, as I said, is going to be due tomorrow, April 17th. And then on Friday, we are having a test. We'll have some tests every single Friday from now till the end of the year. Everyone will need to be on Meet at your assigned time. You will find your assigned time in the attachments underneath the morning message. It'll say Friday Meet Schedule. Click in there and it will have the time that you are supposed to meet with me. You will only be meeting with me for about 10 minutes. And if you're a student who meets with Mrs. Robinson, I tried to make sure that your time was either before or after your time with Mrs. Robinson, so that you could just be on your iPad for a block of time and not be having to get on and off. There's also a review video called Reading, Writing, and Comparing Decimals. You can look at that so that you feel a little bit ready for what we're going to be covering on Friday. Okay guys, so for math we're going to be learning about kites. And we're not talking about the kites that you're going to be flying out in the wind. This is an actual shape as well. So a few things that we should know about a kite. It does follow some of the things that all the other shapes have had as well up until this point. So this is a polygon. Remember, polygon means that it is a many-sided shape, and a kite has many sides. In particular, it has 4 sides. So if I have a polygon that has 4 sides, that is called a quadrilateral. It is closed, meaning that all the edges connect with one another with no spaces or gaps, unlike the one that I just drew. And parallel is a line that, or is a word that we will need when discussing this in comparison to the other shapes. But as you can see here on this kite, it does not have any parallel lines. For example, remember, parallel lines are when lines run next to each other, equal distance, and never run into each other. So here you can see these 2 sides actually end up crossing, and these 2 sides end up crossing as well. So we do not have any parallel lines on this shape. Right angle, again, that's another word that we're going to need so that we can compare that with other shapes. This doesn't necessarily have a right angle that we're looking at right now, but we will discuss how it could have a right angle. And if you remember, a right angle is a corner of a shape that looks like the letter L. And the last one is a new word. This word is adjacent. Adjacent means next to. So for example, I could say that this side and this side of this kite are adjacent to one another. They're right next to each other. And then you could go along the rest of the shape that way, noticing which 2 sides are actually connected with one another. So if I have 2 sides that are next to one another, I'm going to use this nice fancy word adjacent. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into a kite in particular. So like we said on the last slide, definitely a polygon, meaning it has all those many sides. And it has 4 sides in particular, making it a quadrilateral. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. It is closed. All of the sides connect with one another with no spaces or gaps. And it has 2 consecutive sides with the same length. Or I might use the word, instead of consecutive, I might use the word adjacent. So I have two sides that are next to each other that are the same length. For example, this side here is the same length as this side here. Also, to be a kite, I have to have the two remaining sides be the same length. So this side here and this side here are the same length, but they are not the same length as the other two sides. This is what makes a kite stand out from all the other shapes we've learned about so far, is it has two sides next to each other that are the same length, and the other two sides are also the same length, but not the same length as the adjacent sides. All right, so here's where we start comparing the shapes with the other shapes we've already learned, and this is where it starts getting a little bit tricky. So today we've talked about the kite in particular. So remember, to be a kite, I have to have two adjacent sides, which means sides that are next to each other that are the same length, and the other two sides have to be the same length as each other, but not the same length as the first two sides. So let's see if any of these others, or if a kite is any of these other shapes. So let's go ahead and first start with a rhombus. So to be a rhombus, you have to have four equal length sides. If I'm looking at this kite here, it doesn't appear to have four equal length sides. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't though. It could potentially have all equal length sides, but if it did have all equal length sides, I probably wouldn't call it a kite. I would probably call it a square, or like you hear a lot of young kids call it, a diamond. So, could a kite be a rhombus? Well, yes, but there's an exception. All the sides would have to be equal in length, and typically in a kite, they're not all equal. So let's go ahead and skip to square. Could a kite be a square? Well, to be a square, you have to have four equal length sides and four right angles. It kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with the rhombus. If a kite had four equal length sides, then it would end up having four right angles as well. And so yes, it could potentially be a square, but not typically. Now, let's look at the other ones. Could a kite be a trapezoid? Does it have one set of parallel lines? Really, unless it was actually a square, it doesn't have any parallel lines. So typically speaking, a kite is not going to be a trapezoid. Could a kite be a parallelogram, having two sets of parallel lines? Well, in a typical case again, no. The only time it would is if it became a square. Last, could it be a rectangle? Well, to be a rectangle, you have to have four right angles. And the only time it would have four right angles is if it was a square. So really, for the most part, a kite's not really going to be any of these shapes unless it becomes a square first. So I'm going to put yes and no, because the only way it could be any of the rest of these is if it became a square, having all equal length sides. How about the other way around? Could any of these shapes be a kite? Well, let's look at a rhombus. Does a rhombus have two adjacent sides, so two sides next to it, that are the same length? Well, yeah, it does. And I know this because I know all the sides in a rhombus are all the same. So these ones that are adjacent or next to each other, they're the same. And the other two that are left over, guess what? They're also the same. So yeah, a rhombus could be a kite. Could a trapezoid be a kite? Again, I'd have to have two adjacent sides. Well, two adjacent sides that are equal in length. This trapezoid doesn't appear to have any sides right next to each other that are exactly the same size. So I would say no, a trapezoid could not be a kite. A square. Does a square have two sides next to each other that are equal in length? Definitely. How do I know? Well, because a square, all the sides are exactly the same length. So it does have two right next to each other, right here. And it has the other two right next to the other two that are also equal length. So yeah, a square could be a kite. What about a parallelogram? Does a parallelogram have two sides right next to each other that are equal length? Well, typically speaking, no. It has opposite sides that are equal in length. So a parallelogram typically is not going to be a kite. And a rectangle. Does a rectangle have two adjacent sides that are equal in length? Well, this side is the same as this side, and this side is the same as this side. It doesn't have any two right next to one another that are the same size, so I would say no, a rectangle is not a kite. Right now would be a good time to pause the video, go to your Google quiz, and answer the questions about the shapes. Remember, these get so tricky, so if you need to watch this video a little bit longer, that's okay. Alright, so let's get into reading. So today we're going to read a short story called Bats. You guys have already read it this week. And you're going to be answering a question about the main idea. I also want you to think, beyond the main idea, what are some main points or supporting details about the main idea? We already probably all know that the main idea is bats. But what are some of the facts that it talks about concerning bats? Think about when we write an essay, like when we write an informational. We might have a main topic, and then we might have three main ideas that we want to talk about, or three supporting details that we want to talk about concerning them. So what were some of the topics that were discussed about bats? I want you to think about that as you read the story today. Right now would be a good time to pause the video, go reread your article on bats, go visit your Google quiz, answer your questions, and come back and finish the video. Okay, so science. So far in science, we've learned that there are 5 main animal groups. These groups we are most familiar with, or the groups that we're most familiar with, have backbones, and we call those vertebrates. We've also learned there's another group of animals called invertebrates. Excuse me. All of these animals, vertebrates and invertebrates, have adapted over time. Adaptations are when an animal changes to better be able to survive in their environment or with the other animals that they live around. The time required for adaptations is not short. It's over generations. You can't make an adaptation that's going to help you survive better in a day or a week or even a year. It takes generations. So I put this picture here to kind of remind you of that. Generations are years upon years upon years. Some adaptations that can help animals are adaptations that help them deal with harsh weather, like this camel, for example. He has special adaptations. We actually read about camels in class this year that allow him to live in a desert. Like we talked about their eyelashes and their eyes and how it can help protect them. They've been adapted to help protect them from the sand and dirt. There's other adaptations that they have that allow them to live in a desert where a lot of animals can't survive. Also, adaptations can help them find food. So here I have this picture of this giraffe, and you can see his tongue sticking out of his mouth. Giraffes have extremely long tongues. That is an adaptation that they have that allows them to reach for food that might be beyond their reach, which for a giraffe is pretty far. And then the last type of adaptation we might find would be a way for an animal maybe to protect itself from predators. So here I have a picture of a poison dart frog. They use their bright color to kind of warn off other animals that they are poisonous and that they should not be bothered. So you're going to watch this video on Generation Genius about animal adaptations, and there'll be some questions about it on your Google quiz afterward. There will also be an attachment in your Google Classroom underneath the morning announcements for the Generation Genius video, as well as a quiz that's related to the video. Go ahead and pause the video now, go check out the video on Generation Genius and your quiz, and then come back. Alright, so for writing today, we're going to work on the end of your celebrity dinner party essay. Most of you have probably wrapped this up by now. I'm going to be attaching the rainbow editing paper onto our morning announcements in the attachment section today so that you can start editing if you're already there. Start fixing any of those punctuation errors, spelling errors, that sort of thing. Make sure that you have indeed fixed the problem in your essay, and read it to someone, see what they think. They should be able to give you some good feedback so you know if you need to add or change anything. Our app of the day is going to be Freckle again. Remember, 15 to 30 minutes on Freckle is all you really need to do. See if you can pass off a section. And then last, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but don't forget, in the attachments underneath the morning message is the new code. Actually, it's in the morning messages, is the new code for the Prep Google Classroom if you're interested in checking it out. All activities on there are optional. Alright guys, I hope that you're able to do this. I will see you on Meet tomorrow. Tomorrow you will not have a quiz, you will not have a video, you will just come to Meet to visit with me and take your test. See you tomorrow.